Idols. Jesus and his disciples went on to the village around Caesarea Philippi. On the way he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. The reading is taken from Mark chapter 8, verses 27 to 30. The book American Gods, written by Neil Gaiman and later adapted as a popular television series, considers the questions of where we place our value in our lives. It pictures our lives as a war between the old gods of religion and belief and the new gods in which we have started to put our faith. At one point in the story, the god Odin speaks to the old gods, reminding them that they have been usurped from their thrones and replaced with new gods that are now worshipped. "As all of you will have had reason plenty to discover for yourselves," he booms. There are new gods growing, clinging to growing knots of belief. Gods of credit cards and freeway, of internet and telephone, of radio, hospital, television. Gods of plastic and of beeper and of neon, proud gods. Fat and foolish creatures, puffed up with their own newness and importance. Even 2,000 years ago, people had to choose their loyalties and priorities. In other words, they had to decide who to worship. In our passage today, Jesus asks his disciples what people are saying about him. Peter eventually confesses that Jesus is the Messiah. The significance of the location of this episode is sometimes overlooked. The episode took place in Caesarea Philippi on the slopes of Mount Hermon, 25 miles north of Galilee. It was a city that was famously steeped in paganism. In the Old Testament period, it was an important town for worshipping the idol Baal. Later, under the Greeks, the city was called Paneas, as the shrine of the Greek god Pan was located there. Finally, for the Romans, it was called Caesarea Philippi. Philippi after Philip, the tetrarch, puppet king of the emperor, and Caesarea after Caesar himself, who was seen as a divine figure in the empire. So the context of this episode is that the disciples were affirming the lordship of Jesus in a place that reminded them that there were many other idols fighting for their devotion. These other idols were, quite literally, other divine figures. Today, though, it is quite different idols that demand our time and attention. As American Gods illustrates, in fact, it could be said that in our world today, it is not atheism but idolatry that is the greatest enemy of God's will. By making something an idol, we replace Jesus at the most important things in our lives, and so absolutely anything can become an idol to us. As Christians, we should be proclaiming with Peter that Jesus is the Messiah. We should be affirming that living out his will and his message of peace, hope, love, forgiveness, and social responsibility is more important than anything else to us. Our faith demands that we give ourselves up to something that is beyond ourselves. God's will must take priority in our lives. With idolatry, though, the idol which reflects our own wants and desires takes the centre stage, and so it is our personal will that dominates our ways. Life becomes all about me and what is important to me. We start to champion what gives us comfort and makes us feel good, safe and happy, despite the fact that lasting freedom, fulfilment and joy are not to be found in these things. We become slaves to finance, money or credit cards, possessions, houses, cars or electrical goods, status, what people think of us and our appearance, how we look to others, which are all things that only offer a temporary comfort. At the end of today's passage, Jesus tells his disciples not to tell anyone that he is the Christ. In biblical scholarship, the instruction has become known as the messianic secret. Scholars maintain he did this because he knew that the Israelites were looking for a very different Messiah. They were looking for a political figure to start a revolution against Rome. In other words, they were looking for an idol, for something that they believed situated and benefited them. Jesus, so, led his disciples away from the pagan centre of Caesarea Philippi. He refused to be made into an idol. Instead, he led them to Galilee and on to Jerusalem. The consequence of that journey for all of them was, of course, great suffering. He himself was crucified, and 11 of the 12 disciples were martyred for their faith. But the journey ultimately brought fulfillment and great glory. As the Spanish poet Miguel de Unamuno put it, "May God deny you peace, but give you glory." In other words, giving up our idols does not guarantee us a calm and settled life. Jesus wants us to follow him away from Caesarea Philippi and towards Galilee and even to Jerusalem. The journey can be painful. It's not easy to give up our selfish wants and longings, especially as our society has persuaded us that it is only natural and normal to desire money, possessions, status and praise. But for us to affirm with Peter, "You are the Messiah," we are expected to take the journey that the disciples took. By doing so, we affirm, "Your kingdom come, your will be done, rather than my will be done." We move from darkness to a life of colour, hope and fulfilment. We embrace love, compassion and social justice, and we become more like Jesus himself. Be as truthful as you can by considering the question, what are my personal idols that I need to fight against each day? Lay those battles before Jesus and affirm that he is the Messiah, the Son of the living God.